Heart rate versus power. Which one should you monitor during your training session? Which do you prioritize during a hard training session versus an aerobic ride? And why would your heart rate drift or shift between zones? Or is there something else that we should all be paying attention to? My answers: power, it depends, and RPE too. Welcome back, Time Crunch fans. I'm your host, Coach Adam Pulford. And if you like short, concise answers, that's what this podcast is all about. Today, we'll be answering more audience questions in detail like the ones above about power and heart rate. Now, heart rate can be tricky, but it's an important metric to monitor during exercise. We need to remember, though, it is much more variable than power. So we need to observe it with that in mind and not get too emotional when it's a little higher or a little lower than normal. Additionally, wattage from your power meter is consistent and accurate day to day, so long as the power meter itself is calibrated and you take care of your equipment and your technology. Finally, rate of perceived effort, or RPE, is by far and away an overlooked key metric that should also be considered when monitoring a training session. So let's read the original question. Then I'll recap my answers with a little bit more detail and nuance as it pertains to training zones, and we'll wrap things up with a pretty bow to end the day. So here's the original question coming from an audience member from the show. Hi, Coach. I recently discovered your podcast and I'm relishing, well, thank you, the learning journey. So thank you for sharing your knowledge with us mere mortals. Thank you. Thank you for that. This is Mark. Here's the question. Something that has long perplexed me with zone-based training is whether to prioritize heart rate or power metrics. For instance, I sometimes drift into heart rate zone 5 whilst executing threshold power intervals, and or conversely, I may drop into tempo power if targeting zone 4 heart rate. I know power is absolute, but surely shouldn't ignore heart rate as it factors into my training readiness / recovery state, etc. I'd be grateful for any insight that you have to offer. Thanks again, and keep up the great work, Mark. Thanks, Mark. I really appreciate those kind words. Really good question as well. So here's my answer, again, a little bit more unpacked. But in my opinion, you want to prioritize power first. RPE is like a close second, but it's almost like a 1.1 if that's a thing. And then there's heart rate coming in third. The main reason why you want 3 data points to check yourself and monitor over time is to ensure that you're on the right track. In the words of Dr. Steven Seiler, power and pace, heart rate, and rate of perceived effort are the holy trinity of monitoring exercise and performance. Now, it's normal for your heart rate to drift up a bit into zone 5 if you're doing some zone 4 work. And without looking exactly at your data, Mark, this usually means you either need to better pace at zone 4, you need more training time at zone 4, or you might need more volume to have more aerobic capacity to handle the zone 4 work. Okay, now that's just if it's drifting up into zone 5. Now, you also made a nod to maybe my heart rate is drifting down when I'm in zone 4, and it's like going into tempo, and it's a little all over the place. Now, I'll get into the reasons as to why that happens, but I think more common is that heart rate drift up into zone 5. So I'll kind of address that a little bit more. Now, assuming you have done all the field testing, you have accurate FTP ranges, here's my advice if you don't want to see the heart rate drifting up on that zone 5. Is keep on accumulating more time in zone at zone 4 and lengthening the intervals out to help you be more durable and kind of have that higher aerobic capacity going. So if let's just say I'm making something up here, but you're doing 8-minute intervals and you have some drift going on, extend them out to 10 minutes, then 12 minutes, then 15, then 20, and try to accumulate at least 30 minutes of total work per session when you're aiming for zone 4 training. Now, you can go up to 60 minutes of time in zone as well. What that means is 3x10, 3x12, 3x15, do the math, and we're kind of in that 30 to 60 minute window. Generally, with my time crunched athletes, 30 to 45 minutes of time in zone. at zone 4 is about the limit time-wise, but on a weekend, you could definitely rattle off a 3x20 as one of your biggest workouts in this threshold set, or threshold block, I should say, with maybe a total ride time of 2 to 2.5 hours of that ride time on the weekend. Now, just to throw this in here, Mark, sometimes if you see the heart rate kind of drifting down a bit too, it could just be the terrain that you're riding. So if it's an aerobic ride, or maybe you chose some interval where you're just not on the pedals as much, that could be because the legs just aren't under load the entire time, as opposed to a hill climb where you could be riding at a 4% gradient for, those 10 minutes, and the heart rate, will build and build and build and maybe go into that zone 5. That time under tension is really important when we're looking at what's going on with the power and what's going on with the heart rate. So when it's a little bit more rolly, I tend to find the heart rate coming down a bit, or lower than like a steady hill climb effort, of which try to hit that power, but keep the perceived effort in mind. So if it's a little bit more rolly, I'm going to say push match the RPE. These should feel like a 7 or an 8 out of 10 for when I'm coaching somebody to do threshold work. That's the RPE range that I'm encouraging them to do. They have a power range, they have their perceived effort range, then they're checking their heart rate to make sure it's up there. So if it's going down a little bit, just push on the gas a little bit more. Maybe a little bit of pop on those rollers, and that'll drive the heart rate, up there. That'll drive the perceived effort up there. It'll make the effort more squiggly, but that's not bad. Okay, especially if you're prepping for a race or something. A squiggly effort is more race specific versus a steady effort. So take that for what it is, but that is the other part of your question, if the heart rate's slipping a little bit. Now, we could just leave it there, but if you have more time to listen to me here, and you're curious as to why I say power first, then rate of perceived effort a very, very close second, and heart rate third, here's my rationale. Heart rate is more variable than power. I'm going to get a little philosophical here for just a second. Our bodies are brilliant, complex, and smarter than we give them credit for. And this is what we want, primarily because all the checks and balances in place seem to be there to help us not die when something is out of balance, like when we get sick, like me right now, which is why I feel so congested and I'm coughing in between talking points, or we have an injury, or when we're pushing to our limits during training and racing. And because we have these checks and balances, our physiology is not as precise or as predictable as we always want it to be, especially compared to the tools we use to monitor it. Therefore, I encourage you to think of your physiology as a continuum, from resting on one hand to max effort on the other. You're never truly off, and you're never truly maxing out or to the point of death. At least not yet. So in other words, humans are not binary. Don't think of your physiology as such. Don't think of your training zones as such. Each zone picks up from the other and carries on to the next in that spectrum of things. Okay. I'll get to that here more in a second, but these complex systems that regulate or give our checks and balances in the body, like the autonomic nervous system, it's going to regulate us, and it's going to regulate our heart rate 24/7. And everything in life will influence that heart rate. That's life stress, accumulated training stress, hydration, dehydration, depletion of glycogen and electrolytes, caffeination, or how jacked on caffeine you are, excitement, depression, mood states, heat, cold, altitude, in-laws, and lots more. So when things are normal, heart rate can be a predictable normal. However, when things are not normal, heart rate is the first thing to change or have variability to it. And most of my time-crunched athletes don't have normal days always. Therefore, I tell my athletes, and to you, Mark, to monitor training with a power-first approach, then perceived effort, not a heart rate-first approach. The second point to my rationale here is wattage is not variable. Most power meters these days from bigger reputable brands are accurate and they're consistent. You definitely want to monitor training with an accurate and consistent tool like a power meter. But for many reasons that I'll get into here in a minute, the precision of this tool is almost too much if you overemphasize the number more than you should. My suggestion here is to measure everything, but don't latch on emotionally to the number. You also need to understand that there's a broad range to stay in to get the benefits of zone training, and that can be on the higher side or the lower side of the range for any given day, depending on how you feel. I tell my athletes, if you're feeling good, don't waste a good day. Right on the upper end of that zone, give me what you got. Maybe you actually do another interval, but stay in the zone. On days where you're not feeling as good, just hug the lower end of the zone. If we're doing threshold training and I've got 4x10 in there and you're not tanking on the workout, but you're not feeling great. Maybe we did intervals the day before, but hug the lower end of that zone. Try to get at least 3 in, because again, right around 30 minutes of total time in zone is going to help move the needle forward. So let's try that. So you're always kind of checking yourself and balancing with these 3 metrics: rate of perceived effort, power, and heart rate. Now, this leads me to the rate of perceived effort. And this is probably the most important factor in monitoring training. But in my opinion, and this is why we can't put it first, in my opinion, we need something like power or pace to help us get to the perceived effort or help us ground in something. The scale of 1 to 10 needs a power or pace associated with it to help us understand the perceived effort. Now, this is why I call it a close second, if not like a 1.1 in order of priority. It's first, but kind of second until you know where 250's at, or threshold pace, or your time trial effort, things like this, whatever the effort that you're doing. I try to drill this into my athletes as best I can to get them highly aware of their efforts as it relates to the number that they're seeing on their power meters. I use a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being a max effort, 1 being almost nothing. And each zone has a corresponding rate of perceived effort to it. Sometimes the zone will have a range of perceived effort as well. So endurance miles, or zone 2 with CTS methodology, will have a rate of perceived effort of 4 to 5. Okay, very medium. Now, I'll provide a link to the CTS zones with rate of perceived effort scales to it. I'll put that in our show notes. And this brings me to the final point here, and this is the holy 3-in-1, the holy trinity of monitoring exercise. So really, Mark, my answer, if it's one thing, I'm going to tell you it's the holy trinity. That's what Dr. Steven Seiler has kind of popularized these 3 elements as, to be the most important thing to monitor. And you say, why? Well, like I said, power, RPE, and heart rate in that order, in my opinion, is the best way to monitor. And I'll put it in like maybe simpleton Coach Adam knowledge here, but there's probably statisticians listening that could do more justice to this. But 3 is better than 2, and 3 is better than 1. Why? Because 3 data points lets you see more of a pattern. It can cross-check and verify the other data points and give you better feedback, or more like holistic feedback of what's going on during the session right then and there. It also gives that same kind of quantum feedback to the coach who may be looking at the training afterwards. And with 2 points, you don't get that. You may only see things linearly. And with 1 point, let's face it, you could just be shooting in the dark and you don't know exactly where you're aiming. If you want a more super in-depth explanation of that, check out my podcast I did with Dr. Steven Seiler. Just search for his name and Time Crunched in the Apple Podcast or wherever you get your podcasts, and you'll find it there. But real quick, what about breathing? Breath rate and breathing are getting pretty hot again right now, and there is some new tech in wearables that are allowing us to monitor breathing rates during exercise. Now, I'll say this. There's probably going to be a Time-Crunched Cyclist podcast coming out soon about new breathing devices to monitor these things. That it could be helpful, but for right now, I wouldn't get too excited about it. Consider it a curious companion along with heart rate that could tell us perhaps how cooked you may be on hard intervals, or if something could be off at submax other than your legs just being a little tired. I'll keep you posted as I learn more, but in my opinion, it's not something super useful yet, and certainly not more useful than the Holy Trinity of monitoring exercise. So finally, to bring this all home, back to zone training. Your training zones are ranges or spectrums of intensity on this continuum that I talked about before. And those zones are somewhat in the middle, right, of resting on one side and maximum effort on the other. There's not an exact wattage or beats per minute or anything else that's going to pinpoint the end of zone 2 or 3 or threshold versus VO2. And even if you have a power meter in the highest end metabolic cart and you go in and you do an LT test, you'll still have a range of power that you will be at for threshold, because on any given day, it will be plus or minus a little up or a little down due to a number of things in life, all stuff that I mentioned, including how you're improving over time. So keep that in mind. You're always kind of in flux. There's never a homeostasis, really. Okay, so I want you to think about your physiology as that continuum, and everything is always a range. And I think that's going to be the most helpful to answer your full question, Mark. So in closing, if there's one thing to monitor during an exercise training session, it's the Holy Trinity, which is power, rate of perceived effort, and heart rate, which is a cheeky way of saying there's actually three things, right? That's what I've been saying this whole time. Now, that's assuming that you have all the thresholds and devices accurate and calibrated, and that also includes your awareness of your effort, that rate of perceived effort that we're talking about. So if you want to learn more about how to do that, or if you have any other questions about all things endurance training, you can head over to trainright.com/podcast and click on Ask a Training Question. Those get sent directly to me and my little pod team here at CTS, and we'll do our best to answer it on an upcoming episode. Thank you again for listening, and be sure to share this show with your training partner so they get faster too. As they improve, so will you. Thanks again.